I'm just taking a few seconds of this screen, which is what you want to do. We had part of it. I didn't know it. We might as well start with the fact. You don't want to go back to the end. I already got that, so we'll start with it.
We brought together today a panel of our space and missile pioneers, people who are directly responsible for the development of many of the systems and programs that all of us work with today. You'll have a chance to ask these pioneers questions regarding their involvement in the specific programs that they worked on. And you may feel free to ask general questions about how they feel about where we're going in space today. As a reminder, however, this is an unclassified forum, so try not, please, to ask classified questions. There will be action officers roving through the auditorium with microphones. We've got one sides here. Please raise your hand if you have a question, and they'll bring the microphone to you. After identifying yourself, please direct your questions to either a specific panel member or, if it's a general question, to the entire panel. Finally, I'd like to explain that in addition to our 2003 selectees, our panelists also include previously selected pioneers. When the official party arrives, the room will be brought to attention and we'll all ask you to rise.
Well, let me welcome on behalf of all the men and women of Air Force Space Command these distinguished pioneers and their families who are with us today. So let's welcome them all. One of the great things we do in this command is gather together once a year in August the pioneers, those who have gone before us, and really many of them who worked for years in areas where they were tightly compartmented and didn't see others, talked about their systems. Some didn't even get a chance to wear their uniform or part of special and specific programs. But today we have an opportunity in this kind of forum to engage with them and talk to them about what they did and helping be pioneers in this business. And each one of us in this room is part of Air Force Space Command, whether you're an officer enlisted or a civilian or one of the contractors to support what we do, really owes a lot to everything that we are, I think, as a command. We're trying to follow on to this great work of this distinguished group here. And I know them, and they're not bashful. So be careful what you ask them, because they'll tell you exactly what they think. And I think that's important, because it's relevant to what we do today to have their insights based on the kind of things that they've gone through. Many of them had very interesting bureaucratic issues that have to work through some very interesting technology situations, and they're certainly we'll be able to talk about each one of those. And today, over our next hour or so, plus our opportunity tonight at dinner, and then tomorrow at our award ceremony, which will be the culmination of our event, really, to award the pioneer status to the new folks who are joining us, and then also welcome those back. We're sorry that General Bill King and Mary couldn't be with us today. Bill is ill, and Mary's with him, and our thoughts and prayers are with Bill and Mary at this time. Although they made the trip here, they're unable to be with us for today's activities. Perhaps we'll be able to see them tomorrow. I hope so. If not, we certainly are glad that they were able to be with us. So, without further ado, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Rick Sturdivant, our Deputy Command Historian here. Rick's going to be the moderator for this great group, and please engage, and I know you'll be certainly gratified by and educated as well by some great perspectives on behalf of these pioneers. So I'm going to run upstairs and talk to the Vice Chief, and I'll catch up with you in just a minute. So carry on, please.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, carry on, sit down. Thanks.
Thank you, General Lord. Before we proceed with the questions, it's my pleasure to introduce our panel members.
Hi.
I will begin with the 2003 Air Force. Our next honoree for 2003 is Captain Robert C. Bob Truax, and he's our Navy guy, believe it or not. We were purple long ago. Captain Truax played an instrumental role in the early stages of the Thor Intermediate Range Ballistic Missile Program and Weapon System 117L, our first satellite development program, at Air Force's Western Development Division in the mid to late 1950s. Our third honoree for this year, Mr. John C. Jack Herther. At the end there. He designed a 3-axis stabilization system that enabled Lockheed's Agena space vehicle to become the workhorse of the Corona Discoverer reconnaissance program in the early 1960s. Permit me, so that we're fair here, I'm going to ask one question of Mr. Herther, and then I'll turn it over to questions from the audience. Jack, your master's thesis that you and Lieutenant Malcolm Malcolmson co-authored at MIT in 1955 contained a proposal that became the foundation for ascent guidance and on-orbit stabilization of the Agena. How did you and Lieutenant Malcolmson formulate that proposal?
Well, let me back up a little bit ahead of that to give you a nickel's worth of background of where I came from. When I was 13 years old, during the war, they had reduced the driver's license age to 14. And I had worked and earned some money, and my parents were foolish enough to let me buy a Model A Ford in a bushel basket and would allow me to drive it if I could get it together on August when my birthday occurred. That taught me problem solving on a schedule and motivation. And for that, I was able to use a Model A Ford throughout 4 years of high school, and the payoff was enormous. I mean, then I went to North Carolina State Mechanical Engineering, pretty straightforward, took ROTC, communications option. In fact, the Air Force helped pay my way through the advanced ROTC program. And this was, of course, during the Korean War, and I applied for going back to Caltech or MIT. MIT accepted me, but in the meantime, I went to work for Lockheed in Georgia Division on C-130s. I learned a lot of practical stuff down there for a while, and just the nuts and bolts of doing things with hardware. That was almost as good as MIT later in a different way. Went to MIT, took the first year, and the second year, by fall, you had to pick a topic. And we had an instructor that was going for his PhD and needed some help on a Navy project. And somehow he sucked Malcolmson and I into helping him. We were going to be the slave data takers on this project. We had so much hardware problems and fixing this and that. Said, you know, if we don't get a thesis done, we aren't even going to get a degree, and the Air Force is going to go assign us any place. So we bailed out on the Navy, and, and went over because Jim Coolbaugh, I didn't know him then, but I found out later, he had just initiated a contract in early '54 to add on to the work that Dr. Draper was doing at the instrumentation lab, now Draper Lab. They were working on ICBM guidance, that is the Atlas guidance system, which didn't wind up being inertial. Our friend here did it on the Titan, I think the second Titan or third, I lose the second. But anyway, this paid off and they got the weight down, the performance up and whatnot. But anyway, we did a thesis on that, and satellites were so new, nobody could spell it. This was 1954. So one of my roommates picked stabilization, gravity stabilization, the idea being that if you got a satellite way up and there wasn't much drag, you could, and these were observation satellites for military purposes, and these were funded classified contracts. So the idea was to, following the RAND, Uncle Bob Salter's feedback reports, which were the Bibles in those days, we were going to put the TV kind of a system and a readout system in it, but we're going to stabilize it up there with a gravity stabilization. And the idea was that once you launch it up there and it sort of wiggled down, if you could sense the rotation in 2 axes, pitch and yaw, with some flywheels driven by motors, you could cancel that out. And of course, we used to brief various people on this whole concept of Weapon System 117L. And I can remember people asking us, how do you know it'll work? And of course, we'd point to the moon. You always see the single face of the moon pointing at you. It goes around the Earth looking at you. And we said, it's the same thing. It just doesn't take we can't afford a millennium to stabilize it. We're going to do it in 2 or 3 orbits with the active system. So that was it. And for the ascent guidance, which was the easier problem, first of all, we did a tolerance study on all kinds of orbits and using Kepler's law, and we got into orbital mechanics. And at that time, this was pretty new stuff. But anyway, we did that, and tolerance did, and we said, gee, you need about a 10th degree. Well, on an interim report, this goes out to Coolbaugh, who would have been the project officer for the MIT effort. He initiated 2 horizon scanner projects. He initiated one back to MIT, and they got a subcontractor to do the IR work. And North American Rockwell started another one, to parallel competitive different designs to sense a vertical better than 1/10 of a degree. So anyway, that was it, and we were going to use either flywheels or gas to essentially assume the Atlas would get us up to a point where it would cut off and release a satellite vehicle. We would have to reorient it as it coasted up to apogee, then fire that stage, it would be a 2-stage vehicle, and hold the control with a gimbling engine and roll gas, and essentially establish either a near-perfect circular, as well as you could do with the tolerances or the particular ellipse or whatever you wanted. So the basis we did in the thesis was to lay out a requirement, if you will. Then Jim comes and asks Dr. Draper, about assigning someone out to work for him. So somehow I got stuck with it. And the other two guys went to more senior officers where they got more time off for golf and whatnot. In the flight control laboratory and the weapons guidance laboratory. I've been wanting to say this for years, Jim. Anyway, the three of us were assigned to this Project 117. We were the nucleus of the project office. And of course, by then, the thing was getting a little stature. Bill King was running it, then Lieutenant Colonel King. And in fact, the main function of our project office was to dream up stories and demonstrations and go all around the country trying to get money, much like Bob is doing for his enterprise. You'll hear about that later. But in fact, that's why Bill named the thing the Pied Piper, because that's really what we look like, a bunch of troops going around to various military organizations, intelligence organizations to get funding for implementing this thing, because we really had no money. We had some state-of-the-art, what you'd call risk money, for doing things like the MIT studies. We did solar cells, nuclear rocket, nuclear propulsion, radioisotope, a bunch of things like that. Freebie. Jim would talk these laboratory chiefs at the end of the year into spending their own money because we were such nice guys. We had a 1A priority. We were going to cut them in on the project whenever it happened, if it happened. And with that kind of a start, General Schreier, we were talking about, now we wanted to go talk to the ballistic missile contractors. Well, General Schreier and Remo Wooldridge, his advisor, considered us basically a nuisance, I would say. Because even talking to their contractors, we're interfering with a high priority national weapon system and, stay out of the way. So he reassigned all of us, pulled the three of us, there's another fellow, from Wright Pat out to work under Schriever where he could get control. Of course, Bob Truax, being a Navy man, knew just how to treat us. He really, had us under his thumb, and we worked for Bob. And of course, a little bit later, I guess by then we had the contractor selected, Lockheed as a weapon system contractor, Missile Division, and Colonel Loader came in and took over, and between the two of them, we had a real going operation. And other people were added for other functions, payload functions. Jim Plummer, oddly enough, a guy that's one of these pioneers, was the Lockheed subsystem manager for the Eastman Kodak SAMOS payloads, the readout type payloads. And anyway, with that background, I then, during the summer, I guess a budget was pulled together that we would need $160 million to get the program really kicked off. And at that time, Undersecretary Quarles was saying, don't cut metal. And Air Force guys were saying, we're going to do it anyway. And there was some of these things going on up there which was above my pay grade. But anyway, instead of the $160 million, we got $3 million, which is $2 million less than we had at Wright Pat. We considered the $5 million was nothing. So anyway, I said, this is no fun for me. I said, I would like to go back to school to get my PhD. I got a master's and owed the Air Force 3 years payback. And I applied for it, was accepted by MIT. They would send me and all that. I went to get my orders cut, and General Ritlin, who I'm finding out much later and didn't know at the time, had just come off the U-2 program when was out there. He'd done a very successful program. And he told me sort of the same pitch we used to give. You're in a high priority mission, son. It's a very high national priority. We can't release you for a PhD. You can do it when you finish this assignment. And I kind of thought about it a while. Well, about that time, Dick Leghorn came out and with Duncan McDonald, the head of the physics lab at Boston University, which used to be Harvard University during the World War II, they developed all the reconnaissance cameras for the Air Corps during that period. BU picked them up, and they were essentially doing balloon cameras, high-resolution balloon cameras that they floated over the Soviet Union. So what Dick was saying was that Boston University during this defense cutback era, much like Harvard, had wanted to dump doing DOD business, particularly when there's no money, or the money is really short. So Dick got the idea that he was going to incorporate ITEC, a company called ITEC, assume the BU lab, which is about 106 people, and he hired me to do the he wanted to hire me to do the stabilization for a satellite camera. So the coincidence of this is absolutely amazing. I had seen General Rittman, got to know in the early August, around the 1st of September, middle of September, I got a telegram from headquarters personnel saying, you know, you can get out of the Air Force early if you want to. You don't have to pay back the 3 years. We'll let you out whenever you want to get out. And I said, you know, as soon as we can. So I kind of spent my time wrapping that up. In the meantime, I talked to Leghorn McDonald. We briefed the Killian Committee with land and everything on the status of 117L. I gave my briefing on the stabilization. At the end of that thing, Dr. McDonald says, we want to hire you. When you go to Boston, talk to Dick about settling it up. So this was like in October, November. So I got out of the Air Force, and December 12th, I got my discharge. December 18th, I started working. We drove back there. And Dick gave me the story then that what he really wanted me to do, he says, we're going to design a low-altitude stabilized camera. We want it 3-axis stabilized. I said, look, you can't work the stabilization system we've been working on at low altitude. There's too much drag. So I came up with the idea of just essentially tilting it horizontal. In fact, it was flying up horizontal anyway, as our ascent guidance got us up there. And that all we need to add to that is we can throw away the damping system for the gravity system so we can save some weight. Replacing that, we can put in a horizon sensor, so then as you go around the Earth, you will have a good measured vertical to correct any gyro drift as you go. And the idea was we do it as a bang-bang system using very small air jets, so that this panoramic camera that was in the balloon is something that went back and forth like that, creating torques. I knew you had to have an active system. I did this in about a week. In fact, we went on, and Dick Leghorn said to me, he says, well, let's do the recovery bucket. So we were looking for a subcontractor to do the recovery bucket. We were talking to the people that did the balloon trapezes for recovering balloon parachutes to take the cameras back, and that was implemented eventually on Corona. We didn't do it. But in a way, I guess we stuck our neck out, as one of the things said. We bid this thing to the CIA, presented it to Dick Bissell, and as I understand it, there's Colonel Red Shepard and Colonel Fritz Oder are the ones that made the decision to cancel what I hadn't even realized was a spin-stabilized camera that was already on contract. Now, spinning was a good idea then because the Russians spun it. The Sputnik was a spinner. The Vanguard was designed, the Navy satellite was designed to be a spinning grapefruit. The Army came through with a spinning Explorer, and of course the Air Force did a spinning one with a camera integral to it. Now, the thing that's a couple of things are wrong with this. The spinning camera in there cannot compensate for the image motion as you go around the Earth. That causes a huge blur. We showed that by just putting image motion compensation on this stabilized vehicle and making it quiet enough that it doesn't blur, sort of a tripod in space, we were able to take pictures 3 to 5 times better than the contract that the CIA already had in place. And the decision was made. Colonel Oder and Red Shepard made it. I had known Red Shepard at MIT. He was my senior officer as I reported in. And that's sort of, I don't know what the question was anymore. I don't know why I tell this.
Well, you've actually answered all of my questions at this point, Jack.
And I've taken too much time, and I apologize.
No, I don't think so, because I don't know if the audience realizes this, but you just have heard a quick and dirty, about 12-minute capsule history of the beginnings of the successful Corona program.
In fact, I'd like to comment a couple other things. The reason I can talk about this is that This was fully classified till 1995 when the CIA opened it up to celebrate Corona and everything about it. Just to give you a couple of statistics, 144 cameras were built by ITEC and flew successfully. There's something like a 92% success. The Thor was really successful, the Gina too. We had some camera recovery problems, but anyway, there's 410 miles of 70 millimeter film taken by these 144 missions. They were available on the internet for $15 a picture. If you want Leningrad in the summer, you could get one. I'll make a little pitch for it. They're trying to pay for the program again. But the reason I'm doing this is that Dick Leghorn, we were at the Corona thing, and I had left the program to start my own company with Jim. Still trying to get even with him. But anyway, we started a company in collision avoidance, and the fact that I was introduced by Leghorn because he said, "You didn't get any recognition at all in this thing." I didn't even get mentioned. And he said, you were in on the start. You were a pioneer, and there was about 150 pioneers, but I was kind of there when there weren't any other. I didn't even know those guys. And anyway, because of that, I've talked to 5 historians, and there's a new book that came out, and it wasn't until last year that I saw it. It's called something I never thought I'd see in print, Spy Capitalism, ITEC and the CIA by Jonathan Winters. And in fact, that's where my role by Dick and him hiring me to start the company and all that is told out, spelled out. I really didn't even realize that. If I'd have known it going in, I'd have negotiated a better salary. The second part is that because of this, I've talked to so many people because I can, and I'm also working on other classified programs beyond 72 and currently. But it's so much fun to be able to get this off your chest. And Elaine says, for 35 years, I hadn't the slightest idea what you were doing, and you never told me anything, and now you won't shut up. So.
Good morning, I'm Major Walt Chai. This is for the Hall panel. My question is, as you know, access to space is very costly. And I was wondering if you could recommend any innovative approaches to making space launch more affordable. Thank you.
I'd like to make 2 quick comments, and then I'll shut up again. At the start of the Corona program, when it was approved to go, the CIA asked for the money, and the Air Force was going to get the booster money, Thors and whatnot, but the Agena, payload, and recovery, and all that was the Air Force. But it turns out that when they first got approval from the President, they forgot the boosters. The big item wasn't even in the request. Now, I don't think that could happen today, but there's one example. The other thing is, at this celebration, I heard that the total cost of the Corona program, 144 flights, was $840 million, including the boosters. So it was done on the cheap. There weren't many people on it. I mean, the engineering and the Lockheed's engineering staff was in the payload section was a few. Now, the Agena section had a full-bore truck factory, and so forth. But the special payload stuff was very minimal effort, That doesn't answer your question, but it's a couple of facts to keep in mind. Keep it small.
The only reason that you ought to, going into space is inherently expensive. And you're never going to get around it. Laws of physics are not going to change, so you're going to have to spend X amount of energy to get whatever you want to put there, and you can find ways to decrease costs and become more efficient. But the laws of physics are not going to change, and going to space is always going to be a costly way, albeit there are ways of getting more efficient and cutting those costs down. What you ought to do is be careful of how you select your requirements, because it costs you very, very much to meet those requirements. And my caution would be, particularly to this audience, where you are laying down requirements, you ought to think those requirements through very, very, very carefully. In the airplane business, we know that there are requirements